The air smelled of sweat and steel. Children clutched their parents' hands as they marched, their laughter barely masking the tension that rippled through the crowd. Flags waved, symbols of patriotism now draped in quiet defiance. Then came the first crack, a single shot. Screams drowned out the marching chants, and bodies stumbled backward as clubs swung indiscriminately. The peaceful demonstration had shattered. Memorial Day, a day of remembrance, had become a day of blood. Background. In 1937, a battle for workers' rights was brewing in the steel industry. While U.S. Steel, the industry's largest player, agreed to union demands and signed a contract, smaller manufacturers, known as Little Steel, refused to follow suit. Among these defiant companies was Republic Steel, a powerhouse that rejected organized labor, refusing to give workers better wages and safer conditions. With tensions rising, the Steelworkers Organizing Committee, SWOC, backed by the Congress of Industrial Organizations, CIO, took action. Workers walked off the job, demanding the same union protections granted by U.S. Steel. What began as a strike for dignity and fair treatment soon turned into something far deadlier. On May 30th, 1937, Memorial Day, thousands of steelworkers, their families, and supporters assembled near the Republic Steel Mill in Chicago. They weren't carrying weapons. They weren't looking for violence. They simply wanted their voices heard. But the company and the city's police force had other plans. Chicago, 1937, a city pulsing with industry, but beneath its prosperity, workers fought for dignity. Unionists, families, and strike sympathizers gathered at Sam's Place, hopeful for change. On Memorial Day, between 1,500 and 2,500 people, steelworkers, their families, and curious passers-by walked towards Republic Steel, exercising their right to peacefully picket. But they never reached the gates. 300 police officers stood in their way, refusing to let them pass. Voices clashed. The marchers demanded their rights. And then, the gunfire. Dorothy Day said. On Memorial Day, May 30th, 1937, police opened fire on a parade of striking steelworkers and their families at the gate of Republic Steel. 50 people were shot. 10 would die and 100 were beaten with clubs. 9 were permanently disabled. 28 suffered serious head injuries. The massacre would go down in history. Another brutal reminder that rights are never given, they are fought for. The blood spilled on that prairie paved the way for change, though the fight for fair treatment continues to this day. We must never forget. They were fathers, sons, brothers, and friends. 10 lives lost, not in battle, but in the fight for dignity. The price of fair wages and union recognition was paid in blood. Hilding Anderson, 27, hopeful for change, shot down, succumbing to his injuries on June 3, 1937. Alfred Causey, 43, standing with his fellow workers, his voice silenced forever. Leo Francisco, only 17, a boy among men believing in justice, died weeks later from the wounds inflicted that day. Earl Handley, 37, Otis Jones, 33, both struck down, their dreams unfinished. Sam Popovich, 45, Kenneth Reed, 23, Joseph Rothman, 48, their march for fairness met with bullets and clubs. Anthony Tagliori, 26, survived the initial assault, only to die days later from his injuries. And finally, Lee Tisdale, 50. His fight ended not at the gates of Republic Steel, but weeks later, succumbing to wounds that never healed. 10 lives, 10 dreams, 10 voices silenced in the name of industry. But their sacrifice was not in vain. History remembers, and the struggle endures. The fight for workers' rights did not die that day. It was reborn. The aftermath. What happens when history is rewritten by those in power? In the wake of the Memorial Day Massacre, the truth was buried, literally. The bloodied bodies, the screams of union workers, the terror etched on the faces of families, it was all captured on film. But you wouldn't have seen it. Not then. And maybe not even now. Why? Because the footage was suppressed, kept from the public for fear of creating what Paramount News called mass hysteria. Instead of exposing the horror, the news agencies flipped the narrative. They turned victims into villains, framing the strikers as a dangerous mob, as though the unarmed workers had attacked heavily armed police. The Chicago Tribune published photographs showing officers swinging clubs and firing tear gas, but instead of condemning the brutality, their captions twisted the story. At the height of the battle, policemen using nightsticks to subdue attackers. Paramount did release some footage, but it was edited, sanitized, manipulated. The clips painted the crowd as violent, chaotic, ready to riot, while the real massacre remained hidden. For years, the truth existed only in whispers, buried in archives, waiting for someone to unearth it. The massacre should have led to justice. It should have sparked outrage. It should have forced Chicago's leaders to answer for the blood in the streets. But history doesn't always unfold the way it should. The U.S. Senate's La Follette Civil Liberties Committee launched an investigation determined to uncover the truth. Survivors spoke. Footage was reviewed. The brutality was undeniable, officers firing into crowds, bodies collapsing in the dirt, tear gas turning a peaceful demonstration into a battlefield. The committee exposed corporate influence over law enforcement. Republic Steel hadn't just resisted unionization, they'd helped arm the police. The officers weren't just responding to a riot, they were enforcing corporate will. The truth was right there, recorded on film. But despite the evidence, the investigation led to nothing, no convictions, no accountability. The official narrative stood. The strikers were the aggressors. Police merely defended the city from chaos. The media had shaped the story, and the real history was silenced. Justice? It was never part of the plan. Years later, the voices of the massacre still echoed if you knew where to listen. Molly West was there that day. She remembered the chaos, the blood, the fear, and she remembered the voice of a policeman, cold and unyielding. "Get off the field or I'll put a bullet in your back." It wasn't a warning. It was a promise. But there was no reckoning. No charges. No justice. The coroner's jury called the killings justifiable homicide. The press rewrote history, labeling the massacre a red riot, turning the victims into agitators. Even President Roosevelt dismissed the bloodshed with a wave of his hand, a plague on both your houses. As the years passed and remembrance came in pieces, 30 years after the massacre, on May 30th, 1967, a plaque was placed at 11,731 South Avenue, listing the names of the 10 who died. But time continued to erase them. Today, the plaque remains, but the flagpole is missing. The building, once home to the United Steelworkers, now holds another name. No signs, no recognition. In 1981, Edward Blazak, a former Republic steelworker, refused to let the massacre vanish into history. He crafted the Republic Steel Memorial Day Massacre sculpture standing near the mill's gates. In 2008, it was moved rededicated to a new site at the Chicago Fire Department station housing engine number 104. The Memorial Day Massacre wasn't just an attack on union workers, it was a warning. A reminder that power, when unchecked, will always find a way to silence those who stand against it. The truth was buried. The victims were dismissed. And the killers walked free. But now that you know the real history, what will you do with it? Should those responsible still be held accountable? Has the struggle for workers' rights changed or just evolved into new forms of suppression? What other moments in history have been rewritten? If this story made you think, if it opened your eyes to a hidden history, don't let it end here. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell so you never miss another deep dive into the past. And let me know in the comments, what do you think should have happened after the massacre?